Hey, this is Aaron Mesh with Willamette Week. It's a kind of dreary afternoon, and we may or may not have a democracy. And I'm here with John Horvick of DHM Research, the Portland polling firm. Polling is a an industry in some turmoil at the moment after a seemingly gigantic lead for Joe Biden turned into a teeth-grindingly narrow lead. John, what happened?
Well, so of course, I'm the pollster is going to defend myself and our industry a bit. I don't think that's an accurate description. Both now and I think particularly when we look at things a week or two from now, once ballots are certified. But let's just try to share some like my initial thoughts about what the poll said before and sort of where things ended up. And there are clearly some misses, but lots of places where they look quite good. At the national level, Biden is probably going to end up with about a 5-point lead once all the ballots are counted. There's still millions and millions of ballots to be counted in California, New York, and Illinois, just 3 states, and those are going to be heavily Democratic, and those are going to add to Biden's tally quite a bit. The national polls had him about 8 points up headed into this. And on the one hand, we would love them to be perfectly accurate, and I prefer a 1-point difference than a 3 or a 3.5. On the other hand, this is an election during a pandemic where many states changed their election process. Turnout was historic, and they may be off by 3 points nationally. I'm not sure how much apologizing they have to do for that.
All right, so what was it? Mid-July, Sarah Iannarone was up 11. By mid-September, it was tied, and then Ted Wheeler won by a fairly comfortable margin. Did the race actually shift that much? Do you think, or was that just like what was it?
I do think it shifted. So my general take when I started to see those numbers and the final outcomes, and frankly, I think that the way that the campaigns acted was sort of underlied this belief, which is in June, July, August, it was essentially a referendum on the mayor. And that's the way the voters were treating it. And they had the luxury of treating it that way because essentially there was no campaign to speak of at that point. All the attention was on protests and national issues, and neither campaign had really been starting to churn the wheels of their effort, particularly the mayor's campaign. There were no independent expenditures to speak of yet. There was no mail dropping. There was no TV commercials or debates, and the voters were very unhappy with the mayor. No doubt even though he's going to be reelected, they're still unhappy with the mayor. He's going to get less than 50%, and they're unhappy with the direction of the city. They're very unhappy with the way the homelessness has been managed. They're very unhappy with many elements of the protests, which is not to say they disapprove of protests writ large, but there's certainly certain elements. Very upset with his management of the police and the oversight with the protests. But ultimately, when voters got their ballot, it wasn't a referendum on the mayor. And elections are about choices, ultimately. I mean, when we talk about elections being a referendum, I think that's, it's not that it could never be true. It's true to some degree, but I generally think that's the wrong way to look at that. Ultimately, voters are going to have a choice between, in this case, Ted Wheeler or Sarah Iannarone. And once forced with that choice with information, as the campaigns were getting it out about Sarah Iannarone, they chose the mayor.
How big an effect do you think the independent expenditure campaign that essentially cast Sarah Iannarone as the Antifa Twitter lady had on the race?
Oh, I think it clearly had an effect. It drove down the numbers from June or July, whatever they were. They're my numbers. They were leaked to you somehow. I'm still not sure how, but they got to you guys.
Magic.
That's right. But those are accurate, and I think it was a good reflection of where the voters were at. And so the fact that it came down, I think it's not only the independent expenditures. There's also debates and mailers and endorsements and all those things. Opposition campaigns are effective when they say things that feel true to voters, meaning it reinforces some suspicion or belief, and they're consistent with their messaging, and they have some, a sort of brute force behind it, meaning they can repeat it over and over again. And it had all those elements. So I have no doubt that it played a role. I suppose as a voter, like it's the independent expenditure's job and to get an outcome. It's the mayor's job to win. I don't think the voters are particularly well informed about what the mayor's agenda is for the next 4 years, but that wasn't, come November, wasn't their objective. It was to win.
Okay, so got to talk about your one big miss.
Yeah.
The Multnomah County Library bond.
Yeah.
It looked dead in the water in your most recent thing, and it sailed along just fine, like every tax does in Multnomah County.
Yeah, well, except the Metro measure, which I hope we talk about as well.
Oh, yeah.
So that one was up. No doubt about it. Like it is what it is. I guess if I were to defend it, it doesn't need defending. Like, so what we did, just like so viewers are aware of how that worked. We tested it in a survey for OPB, and it was we tested most of the funding measures. Well, certainly all the funding measures are on the ballot in Multnomah County. I'm sure there's some in Washington County and Clackamas we didn't test, like the children's levy in Clackamas County we didn't test. And what we did is just tested the ballot question itself. So exactly as it appeared on your ballot. And there was also, before that survey was done, before the people got their ballots, there was no opposition campaign to the library. And so if you are have the field to yourself and only putting out positive messages, it did well. But yeah, it did well, and our survey said that it would. So there you go.
I am just like, reporters love friction. I'm just fascinated by the question of how something could look that weak in the survey and then win by the same margin that every tax wins.
So here's my explanation. It's the one measure that we tested that actually listed the dollar amount on the ballot. So it lists $387 million on the ballot question, where the PPS doesn't, the Parks levy doesn't, the Metro bond doesn't list that dollar amount. And I suspect, given that dollar figure popping up without any pro messaging that comes along with it, the voters were instinctively sort of leaning towards no, but could be moved pretty easily towards yes with just a little bit of information about it, which we didn't provide them. We just gave them the question. In the actual election, they got messaging to be supportive. But $387 million is nothing to sneeze at. And if you have no other information, I could see why a voter would lean towards no, and then be moved back to yes because they like the library and because it provides good services and yada, yada, yada.